Alcatraz, the rock that refused to be forgotten. Rising from the cold waters of San Francisco Bay is a small island with a big history, Alcatraz. Known to many as the Rock, it once held some of America's most dangerous prisoners. But Alcatraz is much more than an old prison. It's a place where nature, war, crime, protest, and legend all meet. Before it became famous, Alcatraz was just a quiet island covered in birds. In 1775, a Spanish explorer named Juan Manuel de Ayala sailed into the bay and named the island Isla de los Alcatraces, Island of the Pelicans. Back then, the only sounds were crashing waves and the cries of seabirds. No buildings, no fences, just rock, water, and sky. Everything changed during the California Gold Rush. In 1850, President Millard Fillmore saw the growing city of San Francisco and wanted to protect it. Alcatraz was the perfect spot for a military base. By 1853, construction began on what would become Fortress Alcatraz. Its tall walls, cannons, and strong position made it part of a triangle of defense for the bay, along with Fort Point and Line Point. At first, Alcatraz was all about defense, but soon it turned into something else, a prison. In 1861, during the Civil War, the U.S. Army started using the island to hold soldiers who broke the rules and civilians accused of crimes like treason. It became a military prison, a place for deserters, rebels, and troublemakers. Later, it held Native American prisoners, including 19 Hopi men who had resisted sending their children to government boarding schools far from home. By the end of the Spanish-American War, the prison population had exploded. In just 1 year, from 1899 to 1900, the number of prisoners grew from 25 to over 400. To handle the growing numbers, the Army turned Alcatraz into a minimum security prison focused on discipline and rehabilitation. But keeping the prison running wasn't cheap. Everything, including fresh water, had to be brought in by boat. Eventually it became too expensive, and the military gave it up in 1933. That same year, the U.S. Department of Justice stepped in. Crime across the country was on the rise. The Prohibition era had made gangsters rich and powerful. Ordinary prisons weren't enough to keep them in line. So the government turned Alcatraz into a federal penitentiary, a special prison for the worst of the worst. A place with strict rules, no privileges, and no second chances. Alcatraz was designed to break down even the most stubborn inmates. It was cold, lonely, and full of strict routines. For 29 years, it held some of the most famous criminals in American history. Al Capone, the gangster from Chicago. George Machine Gun Kelly, who kidnapped for ransom. Robert Stroud, better known as the Birdman of Alcatraz. And James Whitey Bulger, a violent Boston mobster. Capone, once feared across the country, spent much of his time in Alcatraz sick and fading. He had syphilis, and it slowly broke down his body and mind. He played the banjo in the prison band and spent hours in the prison hospital. Stroud, despite his nickname, never kept birds at Alcatraz. He studied birds while at another prison, but at Alcatraz, he was isolated and watched closely. Bulger later claimed to have been part of secret mind control experiments while he was there, part of a CIA program known as MKULTRA. But the prison was also known for something else, being impossible to escape. Or so they said. In all, 36 men tried to escape from Alcatraz in 14 separate attempts. Most were caught or killed. But 3 men, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, may have made it. In 1962, they used spoons to dig tunnels from their cells, placed fake heads in their beds to fool the guards, and built a raft out of raincoats. When the guards found the empty beds the next morning, the men were gone. No bodies were ever found. The FBI searched for years, but never solved the mystery. Officially, the case was closed in 1979, the same year the movie Escape from Alcatraz, starring Clint Eastwood, brought their story to the big screen. Despite the cold concrete, strict rules, and violent men, some prisoners preferred Alcatraz. It was clean, the food was decent. Each prisoner got their own cell. And because of the isolation, there were fewer fights and less gang trouble. The worst punishment wasn't hunger or beatings. It was time spent in the hole, a pitch-black isolation cell with no sound, no light, and no sense of time. Life at Alcatraz followed a strict routine. Wake-up call came at 6:30 a.m. Inmates had 20 minutes to wash, dress, and clean their cells before breakfast. Meals were served in the dining hall, which held almost 300 men at a time. Silence was expected. Work duty followed: laundry, factory labor, or maintenance. Evenings were quiet. Lights out was at 9:30 p.m. Every move was monitored. Every door locked tight. Even the guards had to live on the island. Their families stayed in separate buildings, with small houses and a social hall. Children of guards played on the same grounds that held murderers. There was even a small bowling alley and a convenience store for residents. Yet at night, the walls echoed with a different tone. Whispers, footsteps, the sound of steel doors. But even Alcatraz couldn't escape its problems. By the 1960s, it cost 3 times more to run than any other federal prison. Supplies had to be delivered by boat. Water had to be shipped in every week, almost 1 million gallons. The buildings were old and falling apart. On March 21st, 1963, the prison was officially closed. The last prisoners were taken away. The cells were locked for good. Alcatraz could have faded into history. But just 6 years later, it became the center of a new kind of battle, one for Native American rights. In November 1969, a group of Native American activists landed on Alcatraz and claimed the island as Indian land. They were part of the Red Power movement, fighting for justice and better treatment from the U.S. government. The protesters used the abandoned prison to make their voices heard. They wanted schools, museums, and cultural centers for Native people. They painted slogans on the walls and brought new life to the empty island. The occupation lasted 19 months. It became the longest Native American occupation of a federal property in U.S. history. Although it ended in 1971, the protest helped spark change across the country. It forced the government to pay more attention to the struggles of Native communities. It was a reminder that the land and the people had their own stories to tell. In 1972, Alcatraz became part of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. A year later, it opened to the public. Visitors could walk the same halls that once echoed with footsteps of guards and prisoners. They could see the cells, the dining hall, the exercise yard. They could stand where history happened. Today, guided tours lead people through the eerie silence of the prison. They hear recorded stories from former inmates and guards. They see the chipped paint, rusted bars, and handwritten notes still clinging to bulletin boards. In spring, wildflowers bloom through cracks in the pavement. Seabirds nest along the cliffs, just as they did long before the first prisoner arrived. In 1986, Alcatraz was named a National Historic Landmark. Today, more than 1.4 million people visit every year. They come to learn, to remember, and to imagine. Alcatraz is no longer a place of punishment. It's a place of memory. It tells the story of America, its strength, its cruelty, its rebellion, and its hope. From a lonely bird island to a mighty fortress, from a feared prison to a powerful symbol of protest. Alcatraz is more than just stone and steel. It is a mirror of the country's past and a voice for its future. For those who walk its weathered paths, the rock still speaks. Not with bars or bullets, but with stories. Stories of those who came, those who stayed, and those who tried to escape. Both the island and what it stood for. This is Alcatraz, the island that refused to be forgotten. This was just one chapter in a never-ending story. Hit like, subscribe, and step into the next era, only on Navigators.